It was just another day for the flight attendant, a woman who had spent more than 10 years working on planes. She knew how things worked up in the air, how to handle passengers when they got cranky, how to keep kids entertained so their parents could breathe easy, and even how to deal with celebrities who thought they deserved special treatment. But little did she know, this particular flight would change everything about her job, her perspective, and maybe even her life. Flight 247 was scheduled to take off from New York, headed straight for Los Angeles. It was one of those long-haul flights where people usually settle into their routines early. Business-class travelers were already finding comfort in their wide seats, while those in economy shuffled down the narrow aisle with their carry-on bags stuffed full of essentials. Everything seemed normal as the boarding process went on without a hitch. Passengers chatted quietly, flipping through magazines or scrolling on their phones, waiting for the engines to roar to life. But then something caught the flight attendant's eye. A family of 4 walked onto the plane, a mom, a dad, and 2 teenage kids. They didn't look like your average passengers. Sure, they weren't dressed in designer suits or flashy jewelry, but there was something different about them. The way they carried themselves stood out. They moved with purpose yet calmly, almost like royalty visiting a place incognito. Their clothes were simple, but they wore them with confidence, and their expressions gave off an air of quiet authority. They made their way to their seats in business class. Other passengers instinctively parted around them, creating space as if sensing that these folks weren't ordinary travelers. At first, the flight attendant brushed it off. Maybe they were just really good at commanding attention without trying, or maybe it was all in her head. Either way, she kept doing her rounds, making sure everyone had what they needed before takeoff. When offering drinks to the family, she noticed something peculiar. The father politely declined champagne, saying only, "We'll wait." That response struck her as odd. Most people jumped at free alcohol during flights, especially in business class. But he said it so casually, like he was used to having better options available. His tone wasn't rude or dismissive. It was matter-of-fact, like someone accustomed to luxury but not overly impressed by it anymore. The rest of the family followed suit. The mother smiled warmly, thanking the flight attendant for her service, while the teenagers nodded respectfully, keeping their earbuds tucked away for now. There was no drama, no complaints, nothing out of the ordinary. Yet something about them lingered in the back of her mind. Who were these people? Why did they seem so composed? For a moment, she wondered if they were famous. Actors, musicians, politicians? No, that didn't feel right. Famous people usually traveled with entourages or gave off vibes of needing constant attention. This family blended in too well, almost deliberately. Whatever their story was, it intrigued her. The plane took off smoothly, and soon enough, the cabin fell into its usual rhythm. Some passengers dozed off, others dove into books or movies, and the hum of conversation filled the air. The flight attendant continued checking on everyone, ensuring belts were buckled and trays stowed properly. Still, every time she passed the family's row, she couldn't help but glance over. Something told her that this group wasn't going to stay invisible for much longer. And boy, was she right. What happened next turned the entire flight upside down and left the flight attendant questioning everything she thought she knew about fairness, judgment, and second chances. Little did anyone realize this seemingly ordinary family held secrets that would shake the foundations of the airline itself. But for now, the skies remained calm, and the truth lay hidden beneath layers of politeness and poise. About halfway through the flight, things started to shift. The initial calm that had settled over the cabin began to crack, and it all centered around the family sitting in business class. It wasn't anything major at first, just a small incident that spiraled out of control faster than anyone could have predicted. One of the teenagers from the family reached into the overhead compartment to grab his headphones. He stretched a little too far, and in doing so, accidentally knocked over a cup of coffee belonging to the passenger seated next to him. The hot liquid spilled onto the man's lap, soaking his pants and shirt. Instantly, the man let out a sharp cry of frustration, drawing the attention of nearby passengers. The teenager froze for a split second, clearly startled by what had happened. But then he quickly turned to the man, apologizing sincerely. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice steady but full of genuine regret. "Let me help you clean this up." He grabbed a napkin from the tray table and leaned forward to assist, but the man wasn't having it. Instead of accepting the apology, he snapped back with anger. "Watch what you're doing," he barked, brushing the teenager's hand away. "Do you even care about anyone else, or are you just used to getting your way?" The tension in the air became palpable. Passengers nearby exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how to react. The teenager tried again, keeping his tone calm and respectful. "I really am sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Can I get you another drink or something?" But the man wasn't satisfied. His frustration seemed to grow with every passing second. "Oh sure, act like it's no big deal," he sneered. "You probably think you can just walk all over people because of who you are." That comment hit a nerve, not just with the teenager but also with the rest of the family. The father, who had been quietly reading a magazine until now, lowered it and looked directly at the man. His expression was unreadable, but there was a weight to his gaze that made everyone around feel uneasy. The mother placed a reassuring hand on her son's shoulder, silently telling him to stay composed. The situation escalated quickly. The angry passenger kept hurling accusations, his words growing sharper and more personal. What started as irritation over a spilled drink turned into something uglier. Racial slurs slipped into his rant, loud enough for those seated nearby to hear. The entire section of the plane fell silent, except for the man's ranting. By this point, the flight attendant was alerted to the commotion. She hurried over, trying to assess the situation and restore order. As she approached, she saw the teenager standing quietly, visibly shaken, but still holding himself together. The father remained seated, his jaw clenched tightly, while the mother whispered softly to her child. Meanwhile, the angry passenger continued shouting, pointing fingers and refusing to let the matter drop. The flight attendant stepped in, addressing the upset passenger first. "Sir, I understand you're upset, but we need to keep things calm, here for everyone's safety," she said firmly but politely. Turning to the family, she added, "And I apologize for the inconvenience caused." Her goal was simple: de-escalate the situation before it got worse. But the angry passenger wasn't ready to back down. If anything, her intervention fueled his rage further. "Are you kidding me?" he shot back. "They don't deserve an apology. They deserve consequences." At this point, emotions were running high, and the atmosphere felt charged with hostility. Passengers in neighboring rows shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some whispering among themselves, others pretending to focus on their screens. The flight attendant knew she had to act fast. Her training kicked in, reminding her of the protocol for handling disruptive behavior. She decided to follow standard procedure. After speaking briefly with the captain, she informed the angry passenger that if he couldn't calm down, he might face removal upon landing. Then, turning to the family, she delivered news that shocked everyone, including herself. "For the safety and comfort of all our passengers," she announced, "we'll need to ask you to leave the aircraft once we land." The room went completely silent. Even the angry passenger stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. The family, however, didn't argue. They simply nodded, collected their belongings, and waited patiently for the plane to touch down. Their composure never wavered, even though the weight of the decision hung heavily in the air. As the plane descended toward its destination, the flight attendant couldn't shake off the unease building inside her. Something about the whole scenario felt off. She replayed the events in her mind, questioning whether she'd made the right call. The family hadn't caused any trouble. They'd actually handled themselves with remarkable grace under pressure. So why had she singled them out? When the plane finally landed and taxied to the gate, the family disembarked without a word. Other passengers watched silently, many looking confused or sympathetic. Some muttered under their breath about how unfair the situation seemed. The flight attendant stood frozen in place, watching them go, her stomach churning with guilt and doubt. What none of them realized, not the angry passenger, not the other travelers, and certainly not the flight attendant, was that this seemingly ordinary family held secrets far bigger than anyone could imagine. And soon enough, those secrets would come crashing down, forcing everyone involved to confront uncomfortable truths about privilege, prejudice, and power. The moment the plane's wheels touched down, a heavy silence lingered in the cabin. Passengers began gathering their belongings, eager to leave after the tense incident. But for the flight attendant, there was no relief. Her mind raced with questions and doubts about what had just happened. She replayed every detail of the confrontation: the spilled coffee, the angry passenger's outburst, the family's quiet dignity, and wondered if she'd made the wrong call. As passengers filed off the plane, the family walked ahead, still, calm despite everything. They didn't look back or say a word to anyone. Their composure was almost unnerving, like they were used to handling difficult situations without losing their cool. The flight attendant couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt as she watched them disappear into the jet bridge, but her unease didn't end there. Just as she finished tidying up the cabin and preparing to head to the terminal herself, a message came over her headset. "Please report to the airport office immediately," the voice instructed. Confused and slightly nervous, she complied, wondering why she was being summoned. When she arrived at the designated meeting room, her heart sank. Sitting across the table was none other than the father from the family she'd kicked off the plane. Only now he wasn't dressed casually anymore. He wore a sharp suit, exuding an air of authority that made her stomach churn. Next to him sat several high-ranking officials from the airline, including the CEO. Before anyone spoke, the man stood up and introduced himself. "Hello," he said calmly, his voice steady but firm. "I'm the founder and majority owner of this airline." The room seemed to freeze. The flight attendant felt her knees go weak. Founder? Owner? This same man whose family she'd asked to deplane, was the person who owned the very company she worked for? It felt surreal, like something out of a movie. He continued, explaining that he and his family often traveled incognito to observe how things operated on the ground. They wanted to experience the airline firsthand, just like any regular customer, to ensure the service met their standards. He admitted he was disappointed by what had transpired on the flight, but instead of lashing out or demanding consequences, he chose a different approach. "I'm not here to punish you," he said, leaning forward slightly. "This isn't about blame. What I want is for us to learn from this situation, to understand where mistakes were made and how we can improve moving forward." His words caught her off guard. She expected anger, maybe even termination. Instead, she found herself face to face with someone who valued empathy and growth over retribution. Still, the weight of her actions hit her hard. How could she have misjudged such prominent figures so badly? More importantly, how many others might she have treated unfairly in similar ways throughout her career? She listened intently as the man shared his perspective. He talked about the importance of treating everyone, regardless of status, with respect and fairness. He acknowledged that the angry passenger's behavior had been unacceptable, but he also pointed out that kicking the family off the plane hadn't solved the problem. It had only added another layer of complexity to an already difficult situation. For the first time, the flight attendant truly understood the gravity of her decision. She realized that while following protocol was important, it wasn't enough. True professionalism meant using judgment, understanding context, and recognizing when exceptions needed to be made. And in this case, she hadn't done that. After the meeting ended, she stepped out into the bustling terminal, feeling a mix of emotions: shame, regret, but also a strange sense of clarity. For years, she'd prided herself on being good at her job, confident in her ability to handle tough situations. But this experience forced her to confront the limits of her own perception. It reminded her that people weren't always what they seemed, and assumptions could lead to costly mistakes. Over the next few days, news of the incident spread through the airline's internal channels. Rumors flew around among staff members, and some colleagues criticized her decision, saying it reflected poorly on the company. Others defended her, arguing that she'd simply followed standard procedure under pressure. Meanwhile, snippets of the story leaked online, sparking heated debates among passengers and industry watchers alike. Social media lit up with opinions. Some praised her for standing firm against perceived misconduct, regardless of who was involved. Others accused her of bias, pointing out the racial undertones of the original dispute. The backlash was intense, and for a while it felt like the entire world was watching her every move. Despite the criticism, she decided to take responsibility for her actions. She reached out to the family directly, writing a heartfelt letter, apologizing for the way they'd been treated. To her surprise, they responded graciously, thanking her for reaching out and expressing hope that the incident could serve as a learning opportunity for everyone involved. Encouraged by their response, she began thinking about ways to turn this negative experience into something positive. What if this moment could spark meaningful change, not just within herself but across the entire airline? After all, if one mistake could shine a light on deeper issues, then addressing those issues could make a real difference. Her thoughts turned to the countless interactions she'd had over the years, moments where snap judgments or unconscious biases might have influenced her decisions. She knew she wasn't alone. Most people carried similar blind spots. If she could find a way to address these challenges head-on, maybe she could help prevent others from making the same mistakes. With renewed determination, she started brainstorming ideas. What if she proposed a new training program focused on cultural sensitivity and conflict resolution? What if the airline took proactive steps to educate its employees about implicit bias and inclusivity? These thoughts swirled in her mind as she prepared to pitch her vision to the leadership team. Little did she know, her proposal would soon become the catalyst for transformative change, not just within her airline, but across the entire aviation industry. But before that could happen, she needed to face one more challenge: earning forgiveness, not just from the family she'd wronged, but from herself. The days following the incident were some of the toughest in the flight attendant's life. News of what had happened spread like wildfire, not just among her colleagues but also online. Social media exploded with opinions, and the story became a hot topic of debate. Some people defended her actions, saying she was just doing her job by following protocol. Others criticized her harshly, accusing her of bias and poor judgment. The backlash was relentless, and it felt like everyone had an opinion about how she should have handled things differently. At work, the atmosphere was tense. Her coworkers whispered behind her back, some offering support while others distanced themselves. She could feel eyes on her every time she walked through the terminal or boarded a plane. Passengers recognized her too, occasionally making snide comments or staring at her as if trying to figure out who she was. It was exhausting. For someone who had always prided herself on professionalism, this level of scrutiny felt unbearable. But the hardest part wasn't the criticism, it was the guilt. Every night she replayed the scene in her mind. The spilled coffee, the angry passenger's outburst, the family's quiet dignity, and finally, her decision to ask them to leave the plane. Over and over again, she questioned whether she'd acted fairly. Could she have handled it differently? Should she have stood up for the family instead of siding with protocol? These thoughts haunted her, keeping her awake long into the night. Determined to make amends, she decided to reach out directly to the family. She wrote a heartfelt letter, pouring her emotions onto the page. In it, she apologized sincerely for how they had been treated and acknowledged that her actions may have caused them pain. She admitted that she had made a mistake and promised to learn from it. When she sent the letter, she didn't expect much, maybe a polite response or even silence. But to her surprise, they replied almost immediately. Their response was gracious and understanding. They thanked her for reaching out and assured her that they held no ill will toward her. They explained that mistakes happen, and what mattered most was learning from them. They encouraged her to use this experience as a stepping stone for positive change. Their kindness overwhelmed her. Instead of resentment, they offered forgiveness and hope. Inspired by their response, she began thinking bigger. This wasn't just about her personal growth. It was about creating real change within the airline industry. She realized that incidents like this weren't isolated. They reflected deeper issues of bias, miscommunication, and lack of empathy. If she could turn this negative experience into something constructive, maybe she could help prevent similar situations in the future. With this goal in mind, she drafted a proposal for a new initiative aimed at fostering inclusivity and cultural sensitivity among airline staff. She called it Sky Without Bias. The program would include mandatory training sessions for all employees, focusing on recognizing and addressing implicit biases. It would also revamp conflict resolution protocols to ensure fairness and respect in every interaction. Finally, it would partner with diversity advocacy groups to bring fresh perspectives and expertise to the table. She presented her idea to the airline's leadership team, including the founder himself. To her relief, they listened intently. The founder seemed particularly moved by her passion and honesty. He shared his own experiences of facing prejudice during his rise to success and emphasized the importance of leading with empathy. He agreed wholeheartedly with her vision and pledged full support for the initiative. Within weeks, Sky Within Bias was rolled out across the airline. Employees attended workshops where they learned to identify unconscious biases and practice active listening. Role-playing exercises helped them navigate difficult scenarios with greater awareness and patience. Feedback from participants was overwhelmingly positive, with many expressing gratitude for the opportunity to grow both personally and professionally. Passengers noticed the difference too. Reviews highlighted improved service and a more welcoming atmosphere on board flights. Word of the initiative spread beyond the airline, earning praise from industry leaders and advocacy groups alike. Other companies began reaching out, asking for advice on implementing similar programs. What started as one person's effort to right a wrong blossomed into a movement for meaningful change. For the flight assistant, seeing the impact of her work filled her with pride and purpose. She traveled to conferences, sharing her story and encouraging others to embrace accountability and transformation. Her journey, from making a costly mistake to spearheading a groundbreaking initiative, became a testament to the power of resilience and self-reflection. Of course, the road wasn't easy. There were still moments of doubt, times when old fears crept back in. But each time, she reminded herself of the lesson she'd learned. True growth comes not from avoiding mistakes, but from confronting them head-on. And in doing so, she discovered a strength she never knew she had. As months turned into years, the ripple effects of her actions continued to spread. The airline became known not just for its luxury and efficiency, but also for its commitment to fairness and inclusivity. Employees felt empowered to speak up when they saw injustice, knowing their voices mattered. Passengers felt seen and valued regardless of background or status. Through it all, the flight attendant remained humbled by the experience. She often thought about the family who had unknowingly sparked this chain reaction. Their grace and compassion had taught her invaluable lessons about humanity and humility. Though she hadn't known it at the time, kicking them off the plane had set her on a path toward redemption, and ultimately, toward becoming the person she always wanted to be. Decades later, as the flight attendant prepared to retire, she found herself reflecting on her journey with a mix of pride and humility. Her career hadn't been perfect. It had its highs and lows, triumphs and failures, but it was rich with lessons that shaped not only her life but also the lives of countless others. The incident that had once seemed like the lowest point of her career had ultimately become the foundation for something extraordinary. On her final day, the airline threw a small farewell ceremony in her honor. Colleagues gathered to share stories, laugh, and thank her for the impact she'd made. Some talked about how her training sessions had changed the way they approached their jobs, while others recalled moments when her advice had helped them navigate difficult situations. A few even admitted that they had initially doubted her methods but later realized just how powerful they were. But the highlight of the event came when the founder of the airline took the stage. By now, he was an older man, his hair streaked with gray, but his presence still commanded respect. He began by thanking her, not just for her years of service, but for her courage and vision. "You didn't just change this company," he said, his voice steady and sincere. "You reminded us all of what truly matters: treating people with dignity and fairness, no matter who they are. He went on to share a story she hadn't heard before. Apparently, after the infamous flight, he and his family had discussed the incident at length. While some members of the family had felt hurt or frustrated, others saw it as an opportunity. They believed that if handled properly, the situation could spark meaningful change. That belief ultimately inspired him to support her proposal for Sky Without Bias. He concluded by saying, "What you did wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And because of you, we've built something lasting, a culture of understanding and empathy." When he finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. The flight attendant stood there, overwhelmed with emotion. She had spent so many years focusing on improving systems and processes that she sometimes forgot the human side of it all, the connections she'd forged, the lives she'd touched, and the ripple effects of her actions. Hearing those words from someone she once feared and admired reminded her of the power of second chances and the importance of using them wisely. After the ceremony, she spent time chatting with colleagues, sharing laughs and swapping memories. One young flight attendant approached her hesitantly, holding a notebook. "I know this might sound silly," the young woman said, "but I've been writing down everything I've learned from you over the years. Your story has taught me that mistakes aren't the end. They're the beginning of something bigger. I just wanted to say thank you." The veteran flight attendant smiled warmly, feeling a lump rise in her throat. "Don't ever stop learning," she replied, "and don't be afraid to make mistakes. Just promise me you'll learn from them and use them to help others." As the evening wound down, she walked through the terminal one last time. It was strange to think that after decades of rushing through these halls, greeting passengers, and managing flights, she wouldn't be coming back. But instead of sadness, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had given her best to this job, and it had given her so much in return. The next morning, she woke up early, unable to sleep, past sunrise. Sitting by the window with a cup of coffee, she thought about the legacy she was leaving behind. Sky Without Bias had grown into a global movement, adopted by airlines, hotels, and even tech companies around the world. Employees across industries were learning to recognize bias, practice empathy, and create inclusive environments. Passengers were traveling with greater peace of mind, knowing they would be treated fairly regardless of their background. But beyond the programs and policies, she hoped people remembered the heart of it all, the simple idea that everyone deserves to be seen and valued. That's what she wanted her legacy to be. Not the title of founder or leader, but the knowledge that she had contributed to making the world a little kinder, a little fairer. Later that week, she received an unexpected package in the mail. Inside was a framed photo of the family she had kicked off the plane all those years ago. On the back, someone had written a short note. "Thank you for turning a challenging moment into a lifetime of positive change. You've inspired us more than you'll ever know." She stared at the picture for a long time, tears welling up in her eyes. In that moment, she understood the full circle of her journey. What had started as a mistake, a decision made out of fear and misunderstanding, had blossomed into a partnership of growth and mutual respect. The family hadn't held on to resentment. Instead, they had chosen to see her humanity and extend grace. And in doing so, they had transformed not only her life but the lives of thousands of people she had never met. In the years that followed, she stayed involved in advocacy work, mentoring young professionals and speaking at events whenever she was invited. She often told her story, emphasizing the importance of accountability and resilience. "We all mess up," she would say. "But the question isn't whether we fail, it's what we do after we fail. Do we let shame define us? Or do we choose to grow?" Her retirement wasn't quiet by any means. She traveled extensively, visiting places she had always dreamed of seeing. She volunteered with organizations dedicated to education and equality, continuing to champion the values she had fought for throughout her career. And though she no longer wore a uniform, she carried the spirit of service wherever she went. Looking back, she realized that her greatest achievement wasn't the awards she had won or the programs she had created. It was the relationships she had built, the trust she had earned, the hearts she had touched, and the example she had set for future generations. She had started her career wanting to provide good service, but she ended it having redefined what service truly meant. Her story became a reminder that none of us are defined solely by our worst moments. We have the power to rewrite our narratives, to turn pain into purpose and failure into fuel for growth. For the flight attendant, that realization had been the key to unlocking a life of meaning and impact. And as she sat on a park bench one sunny afternoon, watching children play and families stroll by, she smiled to herself. She had come a long way from that turbulent flight all those years ago. But every step of the journey, the mistakes, the lessons, the victories, had brought her exactly where she was meant to be, at peace with herself and grateful for the chance to leave the world a little better than she had found it.